Alice Gould arrives at a psychiatric hospital accompanied by an elderly man who thanks her for her courage before she heads toward the entrance. A doctor checks her documents and everything appears to be in order, including her husband's consent for hospitalization. A separate letter addressed to the hospital director has also been delivered, but since he is away, Dr. Rui Perez opens the envelope instead. The letter is a referral from her attending physician, warning that the patient can justify any of her actions with remarkable skill. She twists even lies in such a way that no one can uncover the truth, and her intelligence is so sharp that she can deceive anyone, even a psychiatrist. During questioning, Alice insists that she was unlawfully committed by her husband so he could gain control of her fortune. However, the doctor has information that she allegedly tried to poison her husband 3 times, which led to her hospitalization. Still, if she truly attempted murder, why didn't her husband go to the police? Perhaps because that would have prevented him from accessing her wealth. The possibility arises that she might be telling the truth. Nevertheless, the doctor concludes that she is paranoid and asks Deputy Director Costello to escort Alice to her room, giving her a tour of the facility along the way. The new director has allowed patients to walk in the park and opened workshops, which has positively affected their well-being. Alice surrenders her personal belongings, including a lighter, but asks to keep one book with her. After reading the title, Paranoia and its Symptoms, Costello agrees to let her keep it. She is thoroughly examined, issued institutional clothing, and advised to choose a simpler name. Once inside her room, Alice immediately transforms her demeanor and pulls hidden notes and newspaper clippings from inside the hollowed-out book. It turns out she infiltrated the hospital to investigate the death of her client's son, Dr. Raimundo, who'd been a patient there. The story shifts to the night when a fire broke out in the hospital, forcing staff to release all the patients from their rooms. During the chaos, the body of one of the twin brothers housed at the facility was discovered. In the present, Alice wakes up in her room, attends morning procedures, and later meets her new neighbors in the dining hall. One of them, Ignatius, seems completely normal and is even allowed to drink wine and keep his own lighter. Suddenly, a short, unstable man obsessed with odd behavior crawls under Alice's table and startles her. Ignatius drives the troublemaker away, but the man's guardian, known as the Elephant Man, comes to his defense. Later in the park, Ignatius introduces Alice to the twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, who are always accompanied by a young woman Romulus insists is their sister, simply because he wants her to be. The narrative returns to the night of the incident. Police arrive at the hospital and discover the murder weapon, a large shard of glass. In the present, Alice rereads the letter her client received, in which an unknown killer blames the victim's father. She begins speaking with patients and witnesses a confrontation between Romulus and the Elephant Man, whom orderlies struggle to restrain. Alice is brought to Dr. Cesar for testing, which she passes with ease, even flirting with him during the process. The story once again shifts back to the night of the murder. Orderlies discover a shattered window and a door, but reaching it would have required nearly the entire hospital. This suggests that the killer deliberately set the fire as a distraction. The strategy seems far too calculated for someone considered insane. Back in the present, Dr. Cesar invites Alice for coffee and continues questioning her. She distracts him with a remark about his appearance, causing him to accidentally pour boiling water into her cup. As a result, he hands her the keys to the doctor's restroom. Once inside, she deliberately clogs the plumbing and runs into the hallway while the archivist calls for maintenance. Seizing the opportunity, Alice searches through records and finds the files from the year she needs. She discovers that on the day the incriminating letter was mailed, Ignacio was the only patient in town. The story returns to the night of the murder, where blood is found on Ignacio's hands just as the medical examiner's car pulls up to the gates. Ignacio is interrogated, and since he is the only one with a lighter, he becomes the prime suspect in starting the fire. However, he denies any involvement, explaining he simply found the body first and tried to help. The investigator is interrupted by a medical examiner who is not the usual one, but he dismisses the concern and tells him to proceed. In the present, Alice questions Ignacio about the day he was in town and whether he sent the letter. Suddenly, he grows anxious and runs toward the building, and she stops him until a heavy downpour begins. Ignacio collapses and goes into convulsions. It is revealed that he suffers from hydrophobia. Back on the night of the murder, investigators realize Ignacio could not have crossed a flooded corridor due to his phobia. At that moment, doctors discover that one patient is missing from the wards. In the present, Alice confides in Ignacio that she entered the hospital with the director's permission, as he was a close friend of the victim's father. Ignacio does not believe her, but mentions that the deceased often fought with the dwarf. On the night of the boy's death, the dwarf could not be found because he was hiding in the garden. Later, Alice witnesses the inappropriate behavior and follows him. The story shifts back to the night of the fire, where the director philosophizes to a detective that if humans are created in God's image like a perfect text, then the patients here are crooked lines God drew while learning to write. He urges the detective to avoid publicity, insisting the killer is still inside the hospital. Soon after, they announce that the missing patient has been found. In the present, Alice searches the woods for the dwarf, but instead encounters Romulus. He claims to know who she is and leads her to a woven house hidden deep in the trees, astonishing her with the strange structure. Romulus insists that she is their mother and says the house was built especially for her. Touched by his sincerity, Alice hugs him, but suddenly she hears a rustling sound nearby and runs after someone. Moments later, she is struck on the head, and the last thing she sees is the dwarf looming over her. Alice later wakes up tied to a bed while Dr. Cesar announces that she killed the dwarf. At that moment, the director, who has returned early from vacation, walks into the room. Alice feels relieved, believing they will finally discuss her investigation and clear up the confusion. However, the director claims he has no idea what she is talking about. She insists they exchanged letters through the victim's father, and he personally advised her how to enter the hospital, but he denies everything. Alice becomes outraged and demands answers, yet instead of receiving them, she is restrained. She is given an injection and placed in isolation. 3 days later, Dr. Costello visits her and reveals that she found newspaper clippings and hidden notes in Alice's room. Alice explains her version of events and asks for a medical board hearing. She insists that she deliberately infiltrated the hospital with the director's knowledge and that the friend who brought her there was connected to the victim's father. At the board meeting, Alice recalls how she met the victim's father at a New Year's Eve gala after seeing his photograph in a newspaper article about his son's death. The grieving father asked her for help and showed her a letter accusing him of being responsible for the tragedy. Based on its tone and structure, she believed the letter was written by someone with schizophrenia, and the hospital was located near the town from which it had been sent. She claims the director agreed to help her gain access to the facility and even coached her on how to convincingly simulate paranoia. According to her, everything was part of a carefully planned investigation. She further explains how she persuaded her personal physician to sign a letter she had drafted herself and managed to obtain her husband's written consent by slipping the document among other paperwork. She told her husband she was leaving for work, and the victim's father personally drove her to the hospital. Alice accuses the director of negligence, arguing that granting the dwarf freedom of movement ultimately led to his death. The doctors listen carefully, and some of them find her arguments persuasive. However, the director reminds them of the alleged poisoning attempts against her husband. He describes how the first incident occurred at a club when Alice unexpectedly appeared for lunch. A month later, another attack allegedly happened after a dinner she organized at home. According to him, when her husband became ill, she was dancing in the living room and claimed she did not hear his calls for help. Her husband later recalled seeing her add something to his food. He found a vial in the cabinet, tested it, and after confirming it contained poison, he provided it to doctors, leading to her diagnosis of delusional disorder. Ignacio later admits that the dwarf's death was actually an accident. The dwarf fell and hit the head after being startled by Ignacio while attempting to assault an unconscious Alice. During this revelation, the director introduces Dr. Raimundo, the victim's father, who denies ever hiring Alice to investigate anything. Alice insists that the man standing before her is not the one who contacted her and demands to see her husband. However, her husband cannot be reached, and her personal doctor is supposedly attending a conference in Zurich. Alice is subjected to electroshock therapy and confined in a cage-like room. While drifting in and out of consciousness, she mentally replays recent events and begins noticing subtle gestures exchanged between her husband and the supposed Dr. Raimundo. She starts to suspect that everything was staged and that she herself was the target of a carefully orchestrated scheme. Eventually, she regains consciousness when she hears familiar voices. Dr. Caesar has allowed Ignacio and Romulus to visit her, and they come to show their support. Alice shares her suspicions with Dr. Caesar, insisting her husband planned everything to gain control of her fortune. She suggests verifying her bank accounts to prove her innocence, but doing so would require permission and another board meeting. Meanwhile, Costello secretly searches the director's office and finds a document confirming a large payment from Alice's husband. When confronted, the director admits receiving the money, but claims it was simply a donation for the hospital. He dismisses Costello and begins organizing a search for Alice, who has once again disappeared within the facility. Chaos erupts when a fire breaks out in the toy workshop. Ignacio overcomes his fear of water by turning on the tap in his room and screaming in panic, creating a distraction. As staff rush to respond, he unlocks other rooms and urges patients to leave, causing widespread confusion. During the turmoil, Alice breaks a window, enters the laundry room, changes into staff clothing, and calmly makes her way toward the exit. Ignacio later discovers the body of Romulus, and the police arrive to investigate yet another death. As Alice approaches the gates, she notices a medical examiner arriving to inspect the body. Hearing the name Romulus, she attacks the examiner, swaps clothes, and enters the facility posing as the specialist. She demands to be arrested so that the police will be forced to properly investigate her case. While examining the body, she concludes that the Elephant Man must be the killer, as the injuries suggest great physical strengths. She believes he acted out of jealousy because he loved the woman Romulus called his sister. The police examine the Elephant Man and find cuts on his hands, supporting Alice's theory. Meanwhile, investigators verify that Alice's bank accounts are completely empty, raising serious doubts about her husband's intentions. Costello presents a document signed by the hospital's doctors demanding the director's resignation. An emergency board meeting is scheduled for the following day to determine Alice's release. The tension within the hospital reaches its peak. Alice later visits the surviving twin and learns that it was not Romulus who died, but his brother Remus. On the night of the chaos, Remus had been frightened, and his brother left him in his room while searching for the girl they considered their sister. The tragic misunderstanding deepens the emotional weight of the story. Alice comforts the grieving twin and promises to visit him in the future. The scene highlights her empathy and leaves the audience questioning everything once again. The following day, Alice retrieves her belongings and appears before the board. She confidently answers every question posed by the doctors. The director sarcastically criticizes his colleagues for falling to what he calls her manipulation and announces his resignation. After deliberation, the medical board unanimously declares Alice sane. At that very moment, the man who originally brought Alice to the hospital enters the room. He is revealed to be her real personal physician. He approaches her calmly and asks what kind of trouble she has gotten herself into this time. Alice is left speechless, and the film ends on an ambiguous and unsettling note. The complex narrative and unexpected twists make the 2.5-hour runtime feel intense and captivating. Fans of psychological thrillers and detective stories will find this film absolutely worth watching.